All right, we continue then. For more now, we cross to our reporter in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. How much more New York does it get? You're right in the middle of Madison Square Garden. Polling stations opened in New York, New Jersey and Virginia early on Tuesday, marking the start of the U.S. election day as President Donald Trump seeks to beat forecasts and defeat challenger Joe Biden. What can you tell us about what's happening really right now in New York?
Well, I think the big story, Flo, is that 100 million people have already voted in this country in early voting. So today is officially election day, but let me show you the entrance to what is one of the largest voting precincts in New York City, Madison Square Garden. I'm just going to ask Aaron to tilt the camera to his left, and it's empty. It's empty. We've seen a trickle of voters coming in, but remember, New York has had early voting since October 24th. We're told that some 200,000 people have voted at this precinct already, and I think a lot of people turning out in their numbers in terms of that 100 million nationally to vote early, heeding the messages about the coronavirus pandemic, the public health emergency, but also, you know, in terms of the aspersions that President Trump has tried to cast on mail-in ballots and mail-in voting. A lot of people therefore opting for that because election officials are quite unequivocal about the fact that this is a tried and tested system. It is a system that has worked in 5 states of this country already, where they only allow mail-in and absentee voting, and so expanded now to a number of states in this country due to the pandemic, and a lot of people using that option so that they don't have to come out and queue in long lines, particularly given that it's only 9 degrees, a high of 9 degrees here, Flo. We are told that at this very precinct, in the days leading up to this, people queued around the block for hours, including, the mayor of New York that had to queue for 3 hours so that he could cast his ballot. So what we expect today is a trickle of voters really to cap off what has been a number of days of early voting here that is expected to break records nationally.
Right. You know, I was earlier on speaking to your colleague there in Washington, Kate, and it was Kate Fisher, and it was so interesting to me, which is something that you're also raising now at the moment, the fact that Trump is already readying himself for legal action. That to me indicates some sort of a panic. I mean, he gives across this brash sort of, confidence, this sort of bravado that we've kind of seen really over the years of his presidency. That to me kind of seems like, hey, things aren't necessarily really that great in the Trump camp. Or do you have something different to tell us then?
You know, we saw this in 2016. There's a bit of deja vu in terms of the frenzied activity that we are witnessing within the Trump campaign. Essentially, he has made 10 stops in 10 different battleground states, essentially the swing states, often repeating visits to the same state on a single day. Yesterday, he was in Michigan twice, in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and I believe Ohio, Pennsylvania. And the concern here is that despite what is coming out in terms of the messaging from the Trump campaign, that they're up, that they're going to win, that they're doing pretty well in the polls, I don't believe the polls, just based on the geography that he's been covering over the last 2 days, you get a sense that there's a little panic. He is playing defense here. Why? Because Joe Biden has consistently, Flo, led nationally by something from 7 to 12 points nationally, but also has an edge in the swing states. And the critical swing states that he has an edge in are places like Texas that would not traditionally be considered viable territory for a Democratic presidential nominee. They've been in Arizona, where they are in touch or ahead of the Trump campaign. So what you're seeing here is a frenzied rush to the finish by the Trump campaign, while Biden and Kamala Harris have spent the last day in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is something that they regard as a key state to block any late surge that might be expected from perhaps a huge turnout from Trump supporters, as we saw in the last days of the 2016 campaign. But Barack Obama, the former president, was in Georgia. Georgia is a state that hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1992. They've spent time in Arizona, that hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1996. And in Texas, that hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1976. This is where the Biden campaign has spent their time. And so Trump is on the defensive here. It's definitely advantage Biden as we head into election night and results night here in the United States, Flo.
Has Trump been, I wonder what's the word to use here, will he be injured by the fact that he had to take a couple of days off from campaigning, which I don't know if he necessarily did that much that as he was supposed to. But will it hurt him in any way, the fact that he kind of had to step back a little bit to focus on the fact that he was he was tested coronavirus positive at some point? Does that have any effect on what can happen now? Because it does seem that during that time, the Democrats were maybe able to cover a little bit more ground at that time, or is that not really an issue?
No, I don't think so. Look, this is the pandemic election, and we are seeing a vociferous campaign strategy from the Trump campaign. They recognize that they need to cover a lot of ground. They believe that having hundreds of people turn out at their rallies, sometimes thousands, massive crowds, no doubting that a lot of people in going against public health protocols in the United States, turning up for those rallies, while the Biden campaign and the Harris campaign have had drive-in rallies where people could stay in their cars, and so you have a lot of honking of horns or honking of hooters as opposed to the cheering of crowds at the rally. So there's been quite a difference in approach here from the two campaigns. The president will be spending his time in Washington, D.C. There was talk, of course, that they would use the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. For a big campaign victory party, perhaps, for the Trump campaign. But given Washington, D.C.'s protocol around the coronavirus, they've had to change their plans, and so the president is expected to host some 400 people at the White House. We don't know if that's also going to turn out to be a super spreader event akin to what we saw when he nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court. Biden, on the other hand, I think feeling very comfortable today, going to Pennsylvania again just to shore up that vote. The reason he's spending so much time in Pennsylvania is because it's part of the blue wall that Donald Trump managed to infiltrate in 2016.
Yeah.
So places like Pennsylvania, you're going to hear a lot about today. You're going to hear about Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio looks like it's trending. A poll came out yesterday from Quinnipiac University giving Biden a 47 to a 43 percentage point lead in this state that often leans Republican more than not. So advantage Biden as we go into this. And, you know, there's a big concern, Flo, about when we're going to get the results, right? Based on all the mail-in ballots that we've received, millions of them to date, there is some concern that is going to take time to tabulate. But here's what we're not talking much about. What happens if Texas goes blue? What happens if Florida, which is one of the early states on the eastern seaboard, closes around 7 p.m. local time, that's about 2 a.m. South African time? That could come in early, and if Biden wins in early, Trump's path to 270 electoral college votes, that's a huge ditch in the road if he doesn't win Florida. Let me tell you that. So we could get early indications of how this vote goes. We might not have a final result, but if Florida goes blue and Texas goes blue, game over.
You know, you've kind of touched on it there. I want to kind of go into the national picture more, just because I'm looking at a lot of these sort of polls and national polls, and, you know, a lot of them sort of pointing to a firm Biden victory. Let's be honest, we've been here before, and one of the questions I was asking our analyst is there a possibility really of, not only Trump surprising us again, but a situation where Biden falls into, I'll just call it a trap for lack of better word, sort of falls into the same trap that we saw Hillary Clinton falling into? Have all those sort of holes been plugged? Have the checks and balances sort of been done by the Democrat camp? And this is just something that I'm asking in terms of wondering whether we could see history kind of, repeating itself, really, Sherwin.
That's the big concern, right? They call it post-traumatic stress disorder from what happened to Democrats in 2016. So as much as the polls show Biden with an edge nationally, of course, that matters less because Hillary Clinton won the national vote last time by some 3 million votes and lost the presidency. So no matter how many millions Joe Biden wins the national vote, say if he gets big numbers in places like California and New York, it doesn't matter because you have to win as many states as possible, particularly the swing states, to get you over 270. So here's what's different about 2016. The women's vote has moved towards Biden, away from Trump. The 65 plus older vote has moved into the Biden camp. That becomes especially critical in a retirement state like Florida, a lot of older people around the country move to Florida in their older age because it's warmer there throughout the year. Winters in New York are very cold for older people, so you see them populate southern states, and you're seeing a shift away from Donald Trump in that category. We're also seeing a surge in new registrations, people that are voting for the first time. And I just saw a poll that came out yesterday that said some 67% of younger voters, up to 75% of young voters, are turning out for Democrats. So there are some demographic shifts that are going to influence what we are seeing in this election, particularly in the southern states that are close to the border. Texas, Arizona, southern states of Georgia. This is where Barack Obama spent some time yesterday because Georgia could go blue for the first time since 1992. So there is a great deal of confidence, perhaps a quiet confidence in Democrats, based particularly on what happened in 2016, but based on the consistent data that we have been reporting on for the last number of months. The data is showing us that Biden has the lead in a number of swing states, or is even in touch in states that traditionally vote Republican. And that is a big concern for the Trump campaign here. Despite what they are saying, we're confident, we're in the lead, don't believe the polls. I say nonsense. The polls have been consistent here, and Biden has literally made inroads in those suburban areas, in white educated voters, even in white non-educated voters, and has tracked Donald Trump in terms of the male vote in this country. So the demographic shifts, the numbers are pointing in a certain direction, but will they hold true when results come in? That's the big question, and I don't have the answer for you there, Flo.
All right, thank you very much, Sherwin. I would have loved to carry on for the rest of the hour, but my director, Mike, is in my ear telling me that's enough, Flo. Otherwise, I'm in that studio with you. So I apologize. Let's leave it there, but certainly we'll be catching up with you. Really quite a time there in the US. I certainly am up to date with what's going on at this time, and I'll certainly be catching up with you, whether it is on social media or wherever. Thank you very much for that. As always, Sherwin Bryce-Pease for us in New York there, right in the center at Madison Square Garden for us.